Hello. We're continuing our talk today on where temptations come from. And before we're done, we'll hit on why God would even allow them in the first place. I'm Regina McCullum, and we are finishing up page 49 in your study guide, What Just Happened to Me. Okay, temptation, trial, and test. They are all words that can be used interchangeably when we're talking about the tough stuff that happens in life that shows us what we're made of. So far, we've seen that temptation can be an enticement to sin, but it can also be a difficult circumstance meant to shake your faith. We've seen that these trials can be the result of our own selfish desires, or they can be the devil's physical and mental traps. We've seen that people are sometimes motivated by evil to trip us up as well. Now that's a lot of landmines to dodge. There's nothing to fear though, because Holy Spirit is in you, providing everything you need to overcome. Okay, now here's some good news for you. Not all tests are bad. The second type of test I want to talk about is adversity sent by God with the purpose of proving one's faith. This is not God trying to hurt you, but rather it's God providing a particular circumstance that is an invitation into an opportunity by proving your faithfulness. Maybe this illustration will help explain. When you apply for a new job, you may be given an assignment with specific instructions for how to complete it. This assignment acts as a test to see if you're worthy for the position, right? That kind of test is an invitation into an opportunity. Now, a competitor for the position might try to convince you to be creative, complete the assignment in your own way rather than in the way prescribed. Show the boss that you are innovative and can think outside the box, right? Yeah, no, this kind of test is more like a trap to throw you off course. The difference is in whether the one testing you has your best interest in mind. God will grant us opportunities to trust Him and to prove our loyalty. The test is always about building trust and about strengthening our relationship with God. To pass the test is to choose God's way, even when it looks scary or doesn't make sense to us. When God tested Abraham by asking him to sacrifice his son on an altar, wait, what? God asked Abraham to kill his own son as an offering? Well, yes, God really did that. It's a complex story, but as I tell it in short today, remember, the primary purpose was to test Abraham's faith and obedience. God wanted to see if Abraham trusted Him completely, even to the point of giving up his beloved son. This test was not meant to be carried out to completion. It was a way to demonstrate Abraham's unwavering faith and God's unwavering faithfulness. Okay, so God had promised Abraham a son, but decades had gone by and still no son. Through this promised and still non-existent son, God told Abraham that he would be the father of many nations. Well, 25 years later, the son was finally born. But when Isaac was a young man, God told Abraham to sacrifice this promised son on an altar as a burnt offering. That's insane. First of all, it doesn't sound like God to ask for human sacrifice. And second, if Isaac dies, what about the promise? But it seems Abraham believed God's promises to him enough to also believe that God would find a way to give his son back to him. And I don't know this for certain, but it seems to me that Isaac was also willing to trust God in this process. He was a young man, and likely a strong young man, and Abraham was 120 years old. Surely Isaac could have overpowered him and escaped if he wanted to. So Abraham took Isaac on top of a mountain, tied him down on a pile of dry wood, and raised his knife to slit Isaac's throat. But wait! At the last minute, the angel of the Lord called out to Abraham and said, "Do not lay a hand on the boy. Now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld from me your only son." Abraham passed the test by choosing to trust God even though it looked like death. Now typically, we would judge what we hear from God by putting it up against these questions. First, is it in keeping with the character of who God is? Second, is what you are hearing in keeping with what the Bible teaches? And third, what do my trusted friends and leaders say about what I am hearing? Abraham had a right to seriously question this assignment. It wasn't in keeping with what he had so far experienced about God, but he felt sure he had heard correctly. Now, you and I will likely never experience a testing of our faith on this level. This story is unique in that through it, God was going to make a prophetic statement for all generations. In the Genesis 22 story, just at the moment the angel stopped Abraham from using his knife, Abraham saw a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. God had provided a substitute sacrifice for the offering. Sound familiar? God saved Abraham's son by providing a substitute sacrifice. And much later in history, God's own son became the substitute sacrifice to save all mankind. All right, now here's a simpler example of how God might test us. In John 6:6, Jesus asked Philip where he was going to get bread to feed the huge hungry crowd that was gathering. The verse clearly states that Jesus asked Philip this in order to test him. Jesus already knew what he was going to do about feeding these people, but he asked Philip in order to test his faith. Well, Philip threw up his hands and said they couldn't possibly have enough money to buy this much bread. He failed the test. But another disciple, Andrew, overheard the challenge and offered a test-passing solution. He said, "Hey, there's a kid here with a lunchbox of fish and bread." Now, there were over 5,000 people gathered on that hillside, yet Andrew offered one lunchbox as a possible solution. And he passed the test. Jesus took that lunchbox, gave thanks for it, and as the disciples began to pass out the meager lunch, it multiplied into enough bread and fish to feed everyone present. There were even 12 baskets of leftovers collected, one basket of leftovers for each of the 12 bewildered disciples, just to make his point. Now, as you consider whether a situation you are in is a God-ordained test, a trap of the enemy, or simply a normal life happening, remember, God does not inflict suffering on you, nor sickness. He will not hurt one of your loved ones to prove a point to you. God is a good Father, and everything He does is founded in love. Now, to review our last two conversations, temptations, as in the testing of your character, come from yourself, from others, the devil, or even from God. Regardless of where a temptation is coming from, there is more good news. Look again at 1 Corinthians 10:13 on page 48 in your book. No temptation that comes your way is new. The devil has no new tricks. But don't miss the promise that follows this news. In His faithfulness to you, God will not allow you to be tempted beyond what He knows you are capable of handling. Sometimes I think, wow, God must really think highly of me to allow such a challenge. Well, He does. Every one of us will have our own tests to pass. But why? What good are these trials? Well, we've already seen that some tests are an invitation into an opportunity to trust God. And when you trust Him, He can trust you. Well, James gives us another reason to be glad when we encounter trials. In fact, he urges us to rejoice in trials because they offer us a gift, the gift of being mature and complete. Peter said it too. He said we can rejoice even when we're going through hard times, whether that be difficult circumstances or temptations to sin, because these tests prove the genuineness of your faith, which is worth far more than gold. And in Romans 8:18, Paul said his sufferings were nothing compared with the goodness of what God was working inside him. And this chapter goes on to assure us that God works all things for good of those who love Him. And that good is that we are becoming like Jesus. Romans 8 also assures us that no trial or temptation, no matter where it comes from, can separate us from the love of God, and that we are able to overcome all these things through His love. One of my church pastors preached a message this week where he said a loaf of bread, a bottle of juice, and a bottle of olive oil on the table. His point was that we can't have any of these good and useful things until they have gone through some kind of crushing. Wheat, grapes, and olives. They all have to be pressed and pounded before they can be used to create these delicious things. Do you get it? We are made better on the other side of hardship. God knows this, so He allows it. But don't ever forget that God is faithful. And because He is an ever-present help in time of trouble, hardships don't always have to be hard. Now, next time, we'll open up the last chapter of this book, which is titled, Welcome to the Family. As a believer, you have been adopted into the family of God. Did you know that? I'm looking forward to being with you again as we delve into what it looks like to now be part of God's family on earth. Okay? I'll see you then.